Hello everybody, it's Pineapple here. So today we're doing something very different. I'm teaching you how to build Furniture Lab. Now this video does not pertain to the current format, nor will it be bound to any format in particular. I will reiterate the goal of this video is to give you the tools to build the deck, both in the current format and subsequent formats, by educating you on the optimal ratios of lab cards, generic normal traps, hand traps, consistency cards, as well as educating you on the applications of individual normal traps, continuous floodgates, hand traps, tech cards, lab cards, and everything in between. So once again, I will repeat, the goal of this video is not for me as the content creator to provide you with a deck list. It is to provide you, the viewer, with the tools to be able to build lab going forward. Now that the goals of the video have been laid out, why don't we just hop right into talking about Furniture Labyrinth? Well, first up, when we're talking about lab, we obviously need to talk about the Labyrinth monsters themselves. We'll of course be starting with Lady Labrynth of the Silver Castle, as she's the primary boss monster of the deck. She's a level 8 Dark Fiend with 3000 attack and 2900 defense, and the following effect. While you control a spec card, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. Also, it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. You can only use each of the following effects of Lady Labrynth of the Silver Castle once per turn. If a Labyrinth card or effect is activated, or a normal trap card is activated this turn except Lady Labrynth of the Silver Castle, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. And as a quick effect. When a normal trap is activated, quick effect, you can set one normal trap with a different name directly from your deck. It's important to note that her effect to set a new normal trap from the deck must be changed to normal trap activations. This means that your opponent has the opportunity to use their own quick effect to chain block you and prevent Lady from being able to activate and resolve. Another good example of a card that works this way is Thunder Dragon Titan's effect to destroy a card when a Thunder Dragon monster's effect activates in the hand. It should also be noted that trap effects, which activate in the grave, are not considered activations, but effects, and Lady is subsequently not able to chain to them. And since Lady is often able to access any normal trap directly from deck, is incredibly easy to summon, and is difficult to remove from the field due to her immunity to targeted effects and destruction-based removal, assuming you keep a set card on the field, obviously. She's generally the core of your gameplay loop, and is subsequently recommended that you play at least 2 copies of her. While some lists have certainly seen success playing 3 lately, you can also trim her back to 2 if you feel you're, drawing her too often and want to be summoning her off your welcomes instead. So, moving on to the second boss monster of the deck, we have Lovely Labrynth of the Silver Castle. She's also a level 8 Dark Fiend, although her stat line places her at only 2900 attack and 1900 defense, making her smaller than Lady. She has the following effect. Your opponent cannot activate monster effects in response to the activation of your normal trap cards. You can only use each of the following effects of Lovely Labrynth of the Silver Castle once per turn. You can target one normal trap in your graveyard, set it to your field, but it cannot be activated unless you control a fiend. If another monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect, except during the damage step, you can destroy one card in your opponent's hand at random, or their field. While Lovely may appear to be less powerful on the surface when compared to her counterpart in Lady, you'll quickly come to learn that she's equally or more formidable when it comes to grind games. Her multi-role-like effect to protect your normal traps is a welcome addition, as once she's on the field, your opponent will be able to use cards like Ash Blossom and Ghost Bell to prevent you from using Welcome and Big Welcome to summon more monsters. Additionally, her ability to reset traps in the graves helps ensure that you never run out of options to prevent your opponent from reaching a winning game state. Most importantly, however, is her ability to destroy a card in your opponent's hand or field. This effect is incredibly powerful, as it doesn't matter which field the monster leaves from, only that it does, meaning that your own Big Welcome will in fact trigger Lovely's effect to pop. While Lovely is certainly a powerful boss monster, her inability to remove herself from her hand makes her a brick, so it's subsequently recommended that you only play her at a singular copy. Moving on to the only Labyrinth maid worth discussing, we have Ariana, the Labyrinth Servant. She's a level 4 Dark Fiend with 1600 attack and 2100 defense, and the following effects. If this card is normal or special summon, you get to add a Labyrinth card from your deck to your hand, except Ariana, the Labyrinth Servant, and if another monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect, except during the damage step, you get to draw a card and then apply the following effect. From your hand, special summon one fiend monster or set one spell trap, and you can only use one Ariana the Labyrinth Servant effect per turn, and only once that turn. Now, Ariana is the best normal summon in the deck, as she searches all of your Labyrinth cards, from Furniture to Welcomes to Lady, on normal or special. While this is mostly what she's used for, her draw and special/set effect is often used to remove a Lovely that has unfortunately ended up in your hand. Like Lovely's pop effect, this will also trigger regardless of which field the monster was removed from. Unfortunately, you're only able to utilize one effect per turn, meaning searching and drawing on the same turn is not possible. Most lists choose to run either 2 or 3 copies, as the deck lacks a decent normal summon without her. If you're struggling for space, it's perfectly acceptable to trim her to 2 or even 1 copy if you're really feeling daring, but be aware that you won't have a solid, consistent normal summon if you do. Note that it's important that you only need to get one in rotation, as Big Welcome can return her to the hand. So once you have one in rotation, you can normal her essentially every single turn. Moving on to furniture, first up we have Labrynth Chandelier. It's a level 3 Dark Fiend with 1500 attack and 0 defense, and it reads as follows. Quick effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard and discard one card. Set one Labrynth spell trap from your hand or deck. If a monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect while this card is in your graveyard except during the damage step, you can add this card to your hand. You can only use each effect of Labrynth Chandelier once per turn. It's important to note that since Chandra must be sent to the graveyard as cost for its effect to set, you cannot activate it under any Macrocosmos-like effects, such as Dimensional Shifter. You can, however, change Chandra to a macro-like effect in order to place it in the graveyard before your opponent's effect resolves. Chandra is by far the weakest of the furniture due to its level, which is 3, and its add-back effect instead of becoming an on-field body, like, say, our good friend Labrynth Stovey. Adding it back to hand, however, isn't bad. It's just, not as strong as, say, putting a level 2 body on board. It is still recommended that you play 3, but if you're struggling for space or cards to side out, Chandra is most likely going to be your go-to to trim in terms of just numbers for your list, simply because, it doesn't place bodies on field, like, say, our good friend Stovey. Speaking of Stovey, we're going to move on to what is widely considered to be the best piece of furniture, at least for, of the 2 that set cards on the field. Which is, of course, Stovey Torby. So Stovey Torby is a level 2 Dark Fiend with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and it reads as follows. Quick effect, you can send this card from your hand or field to the graveyard and discard a card. Set a Labrynth spell trap directly from your hand or deck, and if a monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon this card. You can only use each effect of Stovey Torby once per turn. While this card may seem nearly identical to Chandra in a lot of key ways, the main difference is that it summons itself to the field instead of adding itself back to the hand when a monster is removed from the field by your normal trap activation or effect. And what this means is that Stovey is essentially able to immediately become a link material or a monster who you want to return to hand for Big Welcome when you summon. Additionally, the fact that it's a level 2, and while we aren't playing sprites for, big shenanigans, it does pair extremely well with Chaos Angel. Since the big boss monsters in Lady and Lovely are both level 8 dark monsters, you can synchro one of your boss monsters along with whatever recursive Stovey you have to make Chaos Angel and banish your opponent's cards. Due to this extremely recursive synergy that Stovey possesses, almost all lists run it at 3 copies, and it's not really recommended that you would trim that at all. But moving on to the single most unique piece of furniture, we have Kuklok. It's a level 1 Dark Fiend with 0 attack and 0 defense, and it has the following effect. Quick effect, you can discard this card, or this turn you can activate one normal trap card that was set this turn if you control a Labrynth monster. If a card is sent from your hand to the graveyard to activate your normal trap card or your Labrynth card or effect, except Kuklok, while this card is in your graveyard, except during the damage step, you can add this card to your hand or special summon it. You can only use each effect of Labrynth Kuklok once per turn. If you notice something different about this piece of furniture, it's that it doesn't set any traps, but instead enables you to utilize trap cards the same turn they are set. It's also important to note that unlike Stovey or Chandra, this little guy can be used under Macrocosmos, as its only requirement is to be discarded, not sent to the grave. Its recursive effect is also extremely important, as it keeps your resource loop going past more than just the second turn. Additionally, the fact that it can summon itself to the field means that occasionally it enables turn 0 plays, as well as making potential link material or bounce for Big Welcomes. In regards to Kuklok's effect to summon itself, it cannot summon itself or add itself back if it is discarded for the activation of another piece of furniture or something like a paleo effect. It has to have already been in the graveyard prior. Since Kuklok is an essential part of Labrynth's game plan, it is played at 1 or 2 copies each, since seeing it without either or any other lab pieces makes it an essential dead card. You most likely would like to be searching it off of either Ariana or Big Welcome by summoning it and then immediately returning it to your hand. 2 is typically the max amount of copies, however 3 is not unheard of. When decks like Runic or monsters like Diablosis the Mind Hacker run around, losing your clocks to being banished is very risky. And Clock also has a very bad habit of making itself the target of our good friend the Bestials and DD Crow, so making sure you don't lose it to those banished effects without more copies is somewhat essential. Now, moving on to the only monster that falls into the category of neither furniture, the ladies, or the maids, we have Labrynth Archfiend. It's a level 7 Dark Fiend with 2000 attack and 2800 defense, and the following effect. It gains 400 attack for each normal trap with a different name in your graveyard. Your opponent's monsters cannot target fiend monsters for attacks except Labrynth Archfiend. You can only use each of the following effects of Labrynth Archfiend once per turn. If a trap card is activated during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is special summoned, you get to set 1 normal trap from your deck that can only be activated when an attack is declared. Typically, you're going to want to be setting this card right here, Fair Welcome, which we will be getting into momentarily in a little bit. But the idea with this card is that it provides you with the ability to summon out a guy and set more back row, especially when you end up being chain blocked so that you can't chain to Lady. This is what's really important, is that Labrynth Archfiend provides you with more opportunities to, chain normal traps to Lady, as well as just being a big guy who, makes it harder to walk over your other monsters. It's a funky card that would at most be played at 1, but it has seen a lot of competitive success recently due to more decks understanding how to play against Labrynth by chaining, quick effects to the Labrynth traps, just to prevent Lady from chaining. So providing yourself with as many opportunities to chain to Lady is very optimal, even if the trap card that it sets is, not the greatest thing in the world. With that said, again, 1 copy of Archfiend Max. It's a card that you want to experiment with, and it's very format dependent, mostly just on like how many Bystials people are playing, hand traps people are playing, how good of decks are at being able to have quick effect spells to chain, etc., etc. Now that the relevant monsters have been covered, we can talk about the relevant Labrynth spell traps. First up, we have the field spell, Labrynth, and it reads as follows. If you activate a set Welcome Labrynth normal trap, you can add this additional effect to that card's effect at resolution. Also after that, destroy 1 card on the field. If you activate a non-Labrynth normal trap, except during damage step, you can special summon 1 fiend monster from your hand or graveyard. You can only use each effective Labrynth once per turn. If this seems slightly confusing, don't worry. All this card really does is at point of resolution, when you resolve whatever chain link a normal trap with Welcome Labrynth in its name is, you can at resolution choose to destroy 1 card on the field as a bonus effect. Now this effect does not start a chain, meaning that it is very hard to deal with other than negating the trap card. Its other effect is a super powerful recursion effect, which turns things like the virus traps into essentially no-cost cards and OTK tools, as well as making your all non-Labrynth normal traps into just reborn spells. Due to these powerful effects, Labrynth often sees play as a one-of, since it requires other pieces to be of significant value. While losing this one-of can be a massive loss to the deck's recursion, it's still extremely playable without it, so don't attempt to brick yourself by playing more than 1 copy. Now, on to the only other spell in the Labrynth archetype worth discussing. We have the quick play spell, Labrynth Setup. While it doesn't currently see play, I thought it was important to discuss as a side deck card due to, in the event that Big Welcome or Welcome ever spend time on the limited or semi-limited part of the ban list. So that's the reason why this card is in here. So setup reads as follows. Target 2 of your Labrynth spell traps that are banished during your graveyard, except Labrynth Setup, shuffle them into the deck, and then if you control a fiend monster, you get to set non-Labrynth normal traps with different names directly from your deck, equal to the number shuffled. You can only activate 1 Labrynth Setup per turn. And while I can with full confidence say that you shouldn't play this card in the current format of June of 2023, I can say that should Konami choose to limit any of the welcome cards, 1 copy of this card would certainly be advised for its recycling capabilities. Mostly just because, if you have 1 big welcome, you're going to want to use that more than once per duel, and so, you want to be able to put it back in the deck. That's all there is to this card. Just, keep in mind if they ever put Lab on the FNL list. Now, on to the big bads of the deck, the big trap cards. We have Welcome Labrynth. First up, it's a normal trap, and it reads as follows. Special summon 1 Labrynth monster from your deck. Also, until the end of the next turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters from the deck or extra deck except fiends. And if a monster leaves the field by your normal trap effect, while this card is in your graveyard except the turn it was sent there, you can set this card. You can only use each effective Welcome Labrynth once per turn. While this card might appear to just be Scarlet Sanguine on the surface, its real value is its recursive effects, which 1 allows you to chain block your other cards on their recursive effects to insulate you from hand traps while also furthering your grind game. It's an excellent pitch off of your furniture, and once it's in rotation, your grind essentially becomes kind of infinite. It's often played at 2 to 3 copies, though since you aren't able to trigger your furniture lovely made effects to draw without the field spell, you're gonna probably want to cut this to 2. If you're really struggling to find space for non-engine, seriously consider putting it to 2. It's really good in the grind, but you only really need to find 1 copy a game, and since you're playing about 9 other copies of it in the furniture and Ariana, you're always going to be able to find the copy that you need. Now, moving on to the biggest and baddest normal trap of them all, we have Big Welcome Labrynth. Big Welcome reads as follows. Special summon a Labrynth monster from your hand, deck, or graveyard, then return 1 monster you control to the hand. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 fiend monster you control, or if you control level 8 or higher monster, specifically a fiend, you can target 1 card your opponent controls instead, return that card to the hand. You can only use 1 Big Welcome Labrynth effect per turn, and only once that turn. So this single card represents the entire backbone of Furniture Labyrinth as a concept. Since resolving a single copy can trigger so much of your furniture recursive effect, made effects to draw, lovely effects to pop, and generate so much advantage that your opponent is put in a losing position just by this one card. So this type of card is obviously played at 3 copies in any list, since it enables a variety of different plays, from searching monsters by summoning them and then immediately returning them in the hand, turning powerful hand traps like Nibiru and Bestial Magnemite into effects your opponent has to play through every single turn by putting them back in your hand, dodging cards like Imperm, and using them to trigger, of course, all of your furniture effects. It's essentially whatever you can imagine. The sky is the limit with this card. Moving on to generic consistency cards, you really only have 2 viable options, and those are, of course, Pot of Prosperity and Pot of Extravagance. Now, both are perfectly acceptable, but which one you play often boils down to a personal preference. So I'll do my best to outline the key differences to help you make an educated choice. Starting with Extravagance, we'll begin with the benefits. First off, it gives you an extra card, which helps to minimize the cost of the furniture. This essentially means that you have to give up less of your hand percentage in order to resolve them. Additionally, it can provide you access to more normal traps, which is always a benefit. It also works as exceptionally good bait for something like an Ash Blossom. But the drawbacks come at a substantial cost. Since it can only be activated at the start of the main phase 1, it means it's not a very flexible card. It's the first thing you have to do, so you got to really make sure that you remember to do that and resolve it. This means that your extra deck also has to be more narrow, since it banishes randomly and filled with multiple copies of cards. You might only really be wanting to run 1 copy of a card, but you're forced to play multiples because, you don't want to risk losing them to Extravagance. This also cuts off powerful toolbox board breakers like Super Polymerization and Ulti-Slayer, as they essentially require you to have a complete toolbox in order to be as effective as possible. You're also unable to run outs to specific cards like a Nightmare Corruptor Ibali, as you typically don't have space for something like Lingaribo. This cost is significant, so keep it in mind. Moving on to Prosperity. For benefits, Prosperity can be activated during either main phase and at any point during them, meaning it's significantly more flexible. The fact you're able to pick which card you get means that more often than not, you're able to grab a card that is either extremely beneficial to be discarded for the furniture, a powerful engine piece, or just an insta-win card that'll, win on the spot. Think something like an Epidemic Eradicator Virus, Dimensional Barrier, Goes in Match, or Skill Drain. Additionally, being able to choose which card you get means you're never at risk of drawing into a dead card like you would be with Extravagance. But the more important benefit is simply that you get to choose which card you banish for the cost. This means that your extra deck doesn't have to be just 3 ofs. It can be 1 ofs or 2 of tech cards that you want to use. So with the ability to diversify your extra deck toolbox for side cards such as Ulti-Slayer or Super Poly, and you can remove cards you would otherwise never utilize and start to match up something like a Lingaribo against something like Fluandereeze. But moving on to drawbacks, obviously you're only getting 1 card off of it, which means that sometimes you'll be forced to be put in a position where a card like Ash Blossom is a significantly larger blowout than it otherwise would be. This is a significant risk that can be devastating. Secondly, the cost. Now, I'm not talking about the in-game cost, I'm talking about the real-life cost here. Currently, the cost of a single copy of Pot of Prosperity sits at a whopping 38 USD for a single copy. This is a pricey card with huge upside and applications that has led to this obviously huge price tag. And whether you choose to pay said price for it is entirely up to you. But, the cheap version, Extravagance, is available for like $1, so keep that in mind. But whichever pot you choose, you have to make sure you have 3 copies and you have to build your extra deck accordingly. Specific cards needed to outdumb floodgates will change, so that'll always be on the lookout if you are on a Prosperity variant. Lingaribo is just an example here, but I'm certain that we will find, new text to outdumb cards in the future. So keep that in mind for that if you are on a Prosperity variant. So now we get to talk about probably the most important deck building decisions you'll have to make, deciding what normal traps to play. Typically, you want to be running something between 3 to 5 normal traps that aren't your welcomes, your imperms, just the generic ones. Now, this does include your floodgate normal traps, so keep that in mind. That space is generally very tight, and your removal traps have to be the best of the best for this benefit. You can obviously run more normal traps. Just 3 to 5 as of this moment is kind of what you're aiming for, unless you're on a super, super heavy trap toolbox build. Moving on, there are 5 gold standard removal traps, and any future removal traps that get printed, you should compare them to these and ask yourself, does it consistently have a better metagame matchup than all of these do at the same moment? If the answer is yes, then you should consider playing it. So first up, we have the ever lovely Dogmatic Punishment. It reads as follows: target a face-up monster your opponent controls, send a monster with equal or higher attack from your extra deck to the graveyard, and if you do, destroy that monster. Until the end phase of your next turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck. You can only activate one Dogmatica punishment per turn. Punishment is going to be your absolute powerhouse that's good typically in any format. That doesn't see heavy play for Macrocosmos-like effects, since the monster you send off punishment has to hit the graveyard to destroy the target. Since the most typical monster is going to be something like an Elder Entity Entis or a Malong, you'll usually get to remove another card from the board, making it punishment typically 2 for 1. This makes it a very versatile and subsequently solid pick, especially at the start of formats, before better and more precise pictures of the metagame form. Next up, we have, of course, the ever lovely Terrors of the Overroot. It has you target a card your opponent controls and a card in their graveyard. Send the card on the field to the graveyard, and if you do, you set the other card from their graveyard to your opponent's field. You can only activate one Terrors of the Overroot per turn. Now, Terrors is an incredibly powerful card that can be used to remove not just monsters, but spell traps as well. And when combined with the fact that it sends instead of destroying the targeted card, leaves you with a common workaround to annoying monsters that can't be destroyed by card effects. Also, its ability to remove cards from the graveyard is incredibly powerful as well. Think about getting cards with substitution destruction effects such as Branded Opening out of the graveyard. Additionally, giving your opponent a set monster can be devastating in certain matchups, things like Kashtira. But be aware that, however, that if you are under a Macrocosmos effect while this card is on the field, the card will still be removed from the field. It'll get banished, of course, and the card in the graveyard will not return due to the other target not being sent to the grave. Like Punishment, Terrors often finds itself in your deck list at the start of formats, but since it's the main form of potential spell trap removal outside of Lovely and the field spell, it often sticks around regardless of how much of a blowout it can be. But always be aware that the card you're giving back to your opponent, because it may come back to bite you. Third up, we have Duruma Destruction Cannon. It reads as follows: change as many monsters on the field as possible to face-down defense position. Then, if either player controls a face-up monster, they must send all face-up monsters they control to the graveyard. While originally intended as a form of mass removal for Lynx and Towers-like monsters, Duruma has wormed its way into deck lists for its ability to deny resources against decks like Kashtira and Sprite, leaving your opponent with face-down monsters has found a new home with many decks, seeing special summons from the hand when certain conditions are met, such as controlling no monsters or monsters of specific attributes, types, etc., etc. Since face-down monsters possess none of these, Duruma is able to absolutely eat these styles of decks for breakfast. It also is able to force Dragoon into defense if you're able to burn its negate, and subsequently make it easier for Lab to deal with. For formats, start with this in the side typically, but you should feel it. Should you feel it's necessary, it's certainly worthy of a main deck slot. It's slowly worming its way into more and more main decks, but I find that starting with it in the side just for like the first week is usually a little bit of a safer bet. For our fourth slot, we have Ice Dragon's Prison. It reads as follows: target a monster in your opponent's graveyard, special summon it to your field, but its effects negated. Then you can banish one monster from both players' fields to have the same type as each other, and you can only activate one Ice Dragon's Prison per turn. While Ice Dragon's Prison is far and by the most niche of all of the other destruction-based normal traps, it does something that none of the other normal traps do. It's a non-targeting banish. For that alone, it remains on this list, and this card is mostly used to stomp on rogue decks that are all the same typing, but occasionally meta decks arrive that require IDP services. Think about Super Heavy Samurai, stealing a Soul Piercer from grave and banishing it both it and the Link 1 on activation in order to force a discard and deny a reborn. Again, Scarecrow is banned, but the point is more so how it interacts with like certain graveyard decks. Other good examples include removing tier names in the grave, trying to resolve, IPA Vermax, and Eldritch. While none of these things are currently meta, if you see critical choke points that are highly interruptible by Ice Dragons in a certain deck in the format, slot this into your side, or if that deck is tier 1 or higher, consider it in the main. It should be made clear that you as a lab pilot, that this is the removal trap that in the mirror match you should fear the most. Since it can remove furniture from the grave and banish your lady on field, whichever player can reach this first is often put at a huge advantage. So always keep this in the back of your mind. And moving on to our fifth and final standard normal trap, we have, of course, Compulsory Evacuation Device. It reads as follows: target a monster on the field, return that target to the hand. Compulse doesn't see much play anymore, but it's the best non-conditional, non-destruction monster removal available at the time of this recording. This is certainly one of the weakest, and it should only see play if you're truly desperate. It does have applications, however, as returning monsters to the extra deck face down means they can't activate floating effects. Think something like a Mirror Jade. It'll come up at some point again in the future. Compulse will be playable, but as of this moment, not really, but keep it in the back of your mind. So those are the 5 main normal traps that are removal, which are the, big old gold standard. But in order to find a new removal trap which is playable, you have to consider something like this. One, it'll have to be such a blowout that it's the new best removal option. To beat punishment, it essentially would have to be able to consistently remove 3 cards, fill out the niche of one of these cards, but generate even more of advantage, or interact with a meta deck in like an extremely beneficial way. These are all things to consider when you're looking at new removal traps. So keep that in mind. So speaking of niche trap cards, why don't we talk about some? 2 specifically. First up, Torrential Tribute and Archfiend's Ghastly Glitch. Now, Torrential is an incredibly powerful blowout card that unfortunately often hurts you as much as it hurts your opponent. Since Lady only protects herself from her opponent's card effects, Torrential will destroy her along with any other monster you control. And while recovering these monsters can be made a lot easier with something like the field spell, overall the drawbacks more often than not outweigh the benefits. But that said, Torrential can be the game shifter it once was way back, a decade ago. That can flip momentum of a match and, turn a losing position into a winning one. So play it at your own risk if you so desire. But for Ghastly Glitch, however, the tech applications have pretty much nothing to do with this pop effect. Instead, the part we care about is the fact that it'll send a fiend monster to grave. So this is important because, again, when you combo it with the field spell, it can immediately reborn the monster you send. So what this means is that you can reasonably summon any fiend monster from the deck when you combo Archfiend's Ghastly Glitch and Labrynth together. There. So some examples for this include, and they are not limited to, of course, Chaos Hunter to prevent your opponent from banishing cards, Barrier Statue of the Abyss to prevent them from summoning except for dark monsters, Invader of Darkness to prevent your opponent from activating quick play spells, Protector of the Sanctuary to prevent your opponent from drawing outside of the draw phase, the End of Anubis to act as a, sort of pseudo Necro Valley, and Token Collector to, be Token Collector and, eat tokens for breakfast. You can even send something like a Numeron Wall off of this. The applications for this card are actually limitless, as long as they're fiends. So keep in mind that, the specific application of this card is to just floodgate your opponent out. It works sort of like a pseudo mannequin cat for fiends. But the only utility in this card is in the side deck specifically, to get out, really annoying floodgates like these that your opponent hopefully is unable to play through. Also keep in mind this is a conditional trap that requires you to control a fiend, which means that it's much weaker than other trap cards. It also additionally needs the field spell to perform its added benefit, with the exception, of course, being Token Collector, who will activate in Crave. That said, it's a very, meta-specific thing. So whenever, one of the main floodgate fiends comes up, consider, your boy Ghastly Glitch. So we can now move on to talking about Floodgate normal traps. These are your huge blowout, game winner, match winner cards. They give you a real edge over the competition since we can search them. And they're just, what the whole deck kind of facilitates around. Of course, I'm talking about cards like Epidemic Eradicator, Deck Dev, Full Force, which I don't have a copy of because I don't know why I don't own it. But it's basically the same thing as Deck Dev. D-Barrier, and Different Dimension Ground. So EEV specifically being able to remove spells makes it by far the most generic and applicable, as it's able to hit things like Harpy's Feather Duster, Lightning Storm out of your opponent's hand before they can use them against you. Additionally, it's able to remove many consistency cards like Different Pots, Archetypal Searchers. More often than not, EEV Call Spell will be enough to win games on its own, but committing yourself to it completely blind carries considerable risk in game one. Whether you play it in your side or main deck, you should be playing it in some capacity regardless. In pretty much any format, as it'll never really be at least underutilized in at least some matchups. So moving on to Deck Devastator and Full Force Virus. These two go together because they kind of do the same thing, but they hit different decks. They're more format dependent than EEV in order to justify, and therefore their inclusion has to be against a deck which will be completely blown out by them even more than something like a Dimensional Barrier or an Epidemic Eradicator virus. And for that, they're played in the side. But always keep on the lookout for meta decks with small attack and small defense, as these cards are often, able to absolutely beat them into the ground. Remember, Super Heavy Sam, you would just resolve Deck Dev. The game ends. You Deck Dev them for 5. It just ends on the spot. After, Full Force and Deck Dev, we have, of course, Dimensional Barrier. It's my baby. Please don't ban this card, Konami. For my sake, for the health of the game, please ban this card. So resolving D-Barrier against a deck that loses to D-Barrier quite literally just means you win the game. if they're unable to negate it, of course. Since Lovely is able to recycle this card, it's essentially a turn skip every single turn. So as much as you want it, it won't just skip your opponent's turn unless they, die to D-Barrier. For that reason, it's kind of a side deck card, but also, kind of a main deck card, because decks like Branded and Sword Soul, always seem to worm their way into the meta. And also, like, Branded is specifically a really bad matchup for Lab, because, the only real way to interact with them is, Compulse and this card specifically, since everything floats. Also, keep in mind that Link decks just do not give a crap about this card, and since Link monsters are a lot more prevalent now, it's just, not a super insta-win card. But like EEV, whether you main deck or side this card, it's mostly up to you and how you feel about the current format, and which decks you really choose to respect. But keep in mind that be ready for it to just win you games against, decks that lock themselves into one mechanic. But last but not least, actually I should say last but certainly least, we have Different Dimension Ground. Having a macro-like effect for just monsters that is searchable and only lasts one's turn is especially powerful, since you don't really risk banishing your traps, which is very, very good. Macro is very bad. Different Dimension Ground is actually pretty good. However, any deck you would want to side this against, however, hard loses to macro anyways, which means more often than not you want to be playing Dimension Shifter, as it's safer and more consistent, and it does things, turn 0. In other words, this card's role can be filled by like more generic and powerful cards. So generally speaking, it doesn't have a use as of this moment, but should Konami ever decide, Shifter's too powerful and ban or limit it, you should definitely consider DDG. Also, if you really don't want to lose out on, your normal traps being banished by a Shifter, this card is a exceptional option to do so, and I can definitely see it having a home in the side deck moving forward. So that's it for the major trap floodgates, but we're going to talk about, the very fun ones, the continuous ones, right up next. Now, one important thing to note when we talk about, game-ending floodgates is that since their goal is to effectively end the game on the spot, you don't really want to be playing more than 1 or 2. Again, the point of lingering floodgates in your deck is to just win the game on the spot, skip your opponent's turn, etc., etc. So when you end up drawing more than 1, you're just in a bad spot. We can hard search these with things like Lady, so you don't really need to be, playing more than 1 or 2. So next up, we're talking about advantage generating traps. And what do I mean by that, you might ask? I'm talking about these two bad boys, Trap Trick and Trap Tracks. Now, the original purpose of these cards is to act as a makeshift copy of any normal trap in the game, but how they're used in Lab is going to be a little bit different. The way you would ideally utilize these traps would be to grab something from deck for the current turn, chaining your Lady to grab whatever you would need for the following turn, typically a welcome, a big welcome, etc., etc. The idea behind this is that you get 2 searches instead of 1. Essentially speaking, you're setting an extra trap on the field that you otherwise wouldn't have, and give yourself an extra opportunity to chain Lady, should your opponent have a quick effect to chain block you. Moving on to the subtle differences between the 2 cards. Trap Trick specifically has some broader applications that, as it won't require you to destroy one of your own monsters to resolve, essentially you won't have to minus yourself to utilize it. This comes at the drawback of needing to run 2 copies of the trap you want to set, meaning you most likely would only want to be grabbing your welcome or your big welcomes. Now, Trap Track, on the other hand, can get you any normal trap regardless of how many copies you are playing, but it requires you to destroy a monster you control as part of the effect, meaning you have to minus yourself to use it. This is a significant cost, but it can be made up for by utilizing your furniture like Stovey as fodder for it, although I wouldn't say that's necessarily the best use of Stovey, as it can be sent from the field to set other normal traps. Ultimately, though, I think both of these have enormous potential as one-ofs, and are worth taking a look at in formats where you want to generate as much follow-up as possible, and where chaining Lady is, not as ideal. This would, in theory, be run as a one-of single copy, as both lock you out of activating more than 1 trap for the rest of the turn after they resolve. This downside is also rather significant, so keep that in mind, but feel free to experiment more. Additionally, Fair Welcome kind of falls under this category of normal trap that, you want to use to generate advantage. It also doesn't lock you into, only 1 more normal trap, but at the cost of, being a battle trap. It's accessible off of your furniture, but the idea is that they, give you more opportunities to activate your Lady. Now, moving on to some of the cards your opponent might hate you for even more than EEV and D-Barrier, we're of course talking about continuous floodgates. These annoying bastards have probably ruined more games of Yu-Gi-Oh! Than I'd care to count, but they do have some pretty good synergy with Lab, so we'll discuss the major ones that, are worth considering right now. First up, it's Skill Drain. You're all familiar with this card and just how powerful it can be in just about any format where the Adventure Engine and Runic are not running rampant. And while it certainly hurts you by turning off Lady's effect to set and protect herself, as well as all of your other on-field monster effects except the furniture, as they can send themselves for cost to dodge Drain, and set more welcome traps from deck. I do think Drain is a very, very, very powerful card. And while I personally don't think that reducing the game to Lady Beats is a consistently viable strategy going into games 2 and 3, Skill Drain is often able to just steal game 1s, as most decks' main deck spell trap removal is monster-based unless they're, again, on a Runic or Adventure variant. I certainly think that if you want to be the villain of your locals or going to a major tournament and the best meta decks are not on main deck back row hate, you should strongly consider Drain despite the fact that it cuts off your legs. It's most likely going to cut your opponent in half. So who cares if, you lose out in the grind. Probably the most easily main deckable continuous Floodgate. Moving on to the other super powerful Floodgates, we have, of course, Rivalry and Gozen. I'm grouping these together simply because they're heavily dependent on the meta. These are most likely going to remain in your side as you really want to have them make a significant impact. And with how modern decks tend to be very Xenolocked into one type and attribute, or get completely wild with it and play crazy amounts of different types and attributes, the viability of these will vary. Note that if you are playing hand traps that summon themselves, you do potentially risk locking yourself under your own Floodgate or having dead cards due to Rivalry or Gozen. All these cards generally are instant wins against certain decks like Kashtira. They're only really viable going first and risk playing into a sweeper significantly more than, say, just playing regular Fern Lab. But onto the most controversial Floodgate, we're going to talk about Tikaboo. Personally, I don't recommend playing Tikaboo as you can only have a single Fiend on board, so you can't use another Welcome to summon a monster, and you cut off Stovey's Recursion. That said, many decks just can't play under this card, so forcing them to only control one monster while you have Lady up is often enough just to win the game on the spot. At the same time, more decks of late have been designed to play around Tikaboo. Take, for example, things like Gold Pride and Vanquish Soul. These are solid rogue decks at the moment that are able to play Tikaboo themselves and don't care for it at all. At best, I would say this is a side deck card, not that I would recommend playing it, but we do have to talk about it because, it may eventually just become so powerful that, you want to play it anyways. Last up, we have Anti-Spell Fragrance. I think Anti-Spell is a card that wants to fill a very specific niche, which is a continuous card that beats spell sweepers like Duster and Lightning Storm, but cards like AEV also do that while being searchable. I definitely think if the format gets more heavy with things like Pendulum or monster combo decks that search their spells instead of using them as starters, you should consider this card, but only really as a side deck option. Like all other continuous Floodgates we've discussed except Skill Drain, it's only consistently good going first, and for that reason it ranks at the bottom of my Floodgate recommendations, despite the fact it literally doesn't hurt at all. But for a bonus one, I wanted to talk about Iron Wall. Imperial Iron Wall just says neither player can banish cards. This has been experimented with previously in super heavy trap builds because you don't want to be, losing to evenly matched. Again, just throwing this out there that while it does cut off Big Welcome and Grave, it is something to consider if evenly matched is running completely rampant. Although Judgment also, solves that problem. Now, hand traps make up a very critical component of Furniture Lab. In general, you want to be playing something between 6 to 12 of the most high impact hand traps of the format, or more depending on how strong, removal traps and floodgates are. You mostly want to be on turn-ending hand traps. Things like, for example, Nib, Droll, things like Shifter, and Gamma. Things that are just going to end the game on the spot, force your opponent to pass. You want to be just, ending turns with your hand traps. This is true for, hand traps in general, but for Lab specifically because of how we have to discard for, the size of our furniture. We need to be on, the most impactful hand traps we possibly can be, which means that lower impact hand traps, stuff like Ash and Bell, generally don't fit super, super well into the deck. So as hand traps are always going to be, format dependent, I can't tell you what hand traps will be good in the future. But the general rule of thumb is when lower impact hand traps like Ash and Bell are good, you're going to want to lean more on your toolbox of removal traps and stuff. And when higher impact hand traps are, the stuff, play the high impact hand traps that end turns. If Gamma is legal at more than one copy, play Gamma. He beats Ash Blossom. That's all you really need to know. He beats Ash Blossom on your turn, and that's why we play him. So specifically though, hand traps that get bonus value, we're going to talk about hand traps that summon themselves, things like the Bestials, things like Nibiru. These hand traps get extra value because with things like Big Welcome, you can put them back in your hand and utilize them every turn. Think about Nibiruing your opponent every single turn. Think about resolving Magnemite every single turn. These are just immensely powerful plays. They become an every turn kind of thing, which makes them extra value in something like Lab. If you want a proper demonstration, I'll link a video on how I utilize these in the description down below. Of course, monster effect negation, we can talk about Imperm, Veiler, and of course, Ghost Mourner and Moonlit Chill. Imperm is obviously king here because it turns on Lady in hand, so you obviously want to be utilizing Imperm as much as possible. Veiler and Mourner are more format dependent, but you can go with whichever you would like should you have already maxed out on Imperms. For super floodgatey hand traps, Shifter, Lancia's kind of fallen away, so we won't even really discuss it, but again, if it does become meta relevant, think about considering it. But Shifter specifically is really good because Lab can kind of play around Shifter. It's not, the most ideal thing, but if you do use Shifter or you see your opponent's Shifter, chain your furniture at that moment so that you can use it, because under Shifter you can't use furniture except clock because you have to send them to grave. Keep this in mind as it cuts off, their legs. So keep that in mind. So once again, you typically want to be playing, 6 to 12 hand traps in your list. The most balanced, meta viable ones. Imperm is your go-to for effect negation. Lower impact hand traps, lean more on your toolbox. So again, be flexible with your hand trap picks. Now, moving on to the extra, we'll discuss techs and outs to specific cards that you can play. Note that this really only is going to apply to decks that are playing Prosperity. Since when you're working with extra, you generally don't have the consistency needed to work in all of these specific outs, one-ofs, in the extra, so keep that in mind. And first up is, of course, my favorite card of all time, Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. So regardless of which pot you're playing, though, this should be in your extra. She's the anti-cheese white woman. And in a deck that generally has a lot of space in the extra, she's always welcome. Since she's a fiend, you're able to play her under your welcome lock, which means she's always available, unless you're under Gozen or Tikaboo, which, as long as you can put up 4 bodies, she's online. So Towers Monsters be gone, so obviously play Goddess. Next up, the mainstay in the extra, Chaos Angel. Again, this is one that you're going to play regardless of if you're on Extra or Prosperity, just play Chaos Angel. Note that if you are on Extra, you are going to need multiple cards of him because he is the biggest, most important guy. Furniture Lab is kind of this weird trap combo deck that its payoff is, Chaos Angel. Since it can be made by treating any light or dark monster as the tuner monster by turning Stovey into one of the big 8s, you're able to play it consistently to make him for an extra banish. Once again, he's also a fiend, which means that he can be played under the welcome lock. Unlike Goddess, however, he is a dark, which means he can be played under Gozen match. So he's fantastic. We love Chaos Angel. He's also just a big dude. Moving on to Muckraker. This card is used to out really specific things. So Muckraker lets you get around things like Denko Sekka, things like really annoying cards like Jinzo, Dark Simorgh, simply by normaling Ariana and then grabbing Lady. You can make Muckraker, discard, bring back Lady, and then, walk over. So Muckraker is a must-have. Again, if you're playing an extra variant, you're probably going to want 2, but she's mainstay staple just to out weird things. Next up, we're going to be talking about Gamma payoffs here, and it's these 4 cards. So when we're talking about Gamma, if you're from a future where, Gamma is no longer at 1 and is at 2 or 3 and Gamma's viable again, congratulations, you live in the good universe. I currently live in the bad one where Gamma is at 1. Your main 4 payoffs here, this can be any, this Steel Dissipator here can be any generic 10, but strictly speaking, it's going to be one of 2 things that you're going to be going into, and it's going to be either Omega or Oxel Stardust in order to Synchro Climb either into Baronne or something of another, generic 10. But your options are either, make an Omni or, loop another card out of your hand. And that's what you really want to be doing with Gamma here, unless you also could be going into Muckraker. Moving on to some punishment and ulti slayer targets, we have Malong. He's not great as a punishment target, but more specifically as, just an ulti slayer target. He's a bounce. He interacts in different ways, so as a punishment target, he's very solid to play at least as a 1-off regardless of which variant you're on. He's also big enough. Bucephalus, this is your big punishment payoff as well as ulti slayer target because he's able to send Garura to turn your punishments into draws so that you recoup advantage and stuff. He's just a big guy that you send for punishment, and that's why he's here. Piece of Entis is pretty standard. If you're on extra, you can go up to 3. I don't think you need to, but you definitely can. Entis is just this card that's, it turns punishment into a pop 2, it turns Ulti Slayer into a pop 1, in addition to a shuffle, so Entis is unbelievable for this deck. Mirror Logic, Xyz is a really weak typing in terms of like how it interacts with Ulti Slayer, but we play Mirror Logic because it can also sometimes, negate things. It comes up, it does matter, you need a decent Xyz target for Ulti Slayer. Cambro Raster Paleozoic, this is the Paleo link. Its only value is you send it for Ulti Slayer, and then it can banish itself as a substitution protection effect to, prevent destruction, which is, very important when, you're trying to save your back row from something like a Duster. Evil Twins, Trouble Sunny, this is, a link payoff. It's also a really big guy to send for punishment. Just, being able to send, although you do have to play a brick. You can play Dingirsu in this deck, since all of the, big girls are 8s, you can make Ding. He outs specific cards. It's Ding. It's just a weird, like, form of interaction that, protects everything as well as, gets to send things. So you get the added benefit of protecting your back row in addition to, getting to send something. It interacts funky. It's Ding. A copy of Lingeribo. This is specifically to out Nightmare Corruptor Ibali. You don't want to be losing to Ibali, so play Lingeribo. You have space. Nightmare Phoenix. This is to out exactly Royal Decree, because, again, normal summon Ariana gets you to Lady, which gets you to Nightmare Phoenix, because it is a fiend. You can play it under your welcome lock, which means that you can, pop something like Royal Decree. Dugaris is very playable in here. Any deck that, any level rank 4 Fiend is going to be very playable, just because you can play them under the welcome lock. Dugaris lets your guys get big enough to just walk over some towers sometimes. He comes up sometimes. Also, the draw effect is kind of nice. For other rank 4 Fiends, you can play Wave King Caesar, which immediately ranks up into Deus Machine X in order to, suck up like 2 monsters. Actually, I think you can get 3 off of any, 2. But just a really big guy. You can use him to make a really fat Zeus as well. Obviously, you can play Zeus. If you are going into your XZs consistently enough, you can play Zeus. It's Zeus. I don't think I have to explain why this card is in here. You can play any real rank 4, good cards. Baguska is a good Floodgate. Tornado Dragon, some solid back row hate. Exciton Knight is for when you're behind. You can play Dweller in formats where Dweller is legal. Really, the thing that you have to keep in mind is punishment targets, just generic link monsters, generic payoffs, fiends. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward, but, you'll find that there will be more generic outs printed in the future, so keep those on your radar in order to pick them up when they come out. So, we have already talked about the furniture in great length, but we're going to talk specifically about specific techs that you can play to make them, a lot stronger. So, first up, we're going to be talking about Fenrir here. He's Fenrir. You know how this card works. Specifically in Lab, the way you want to play Fenrir is you want to be Fenriring for Fenrir. And the idea of Fenrir is that you add another Fenrir and then you use it to, say, pitch for your furniture. That's the whole idea, is just it's Fenrir for Fenrir. You would play 2 to 3 copies. This is much more effective in something like a Prosperity build because, you can always, ensure that you find Fenrir. Next up, Danger Bigfoot. The idea of this is that turn 0, you would be pitching Bigfoot for furniture, triggering Bigfoot, popping something, getting a set, just, turning your excavate, or not excavate, turning your discard into a pop instead of a, downside. He's also a dark, so you can make Chaos Angel with him. It's a solid pick that's seen some decent results, so definitely consider Bigfoot in your lists. Next up, perform a Pal 5 Rainbow. Rainbow is going to be good whenever, a deck like Adamantipator that doesn't play like any spells is good, or Super Heavy Sam that can't play spells, but just pitching him off of the furniture, he'll automatically activate himself in the Pendulum Scale, so you can use him as much as you want. He's basically free. He can turn 0, Mystic Mine your opponent, which is very funny, but keep in mind that it's only in the hand. It doesn't, stop Ash. It's worth a consideration based on the meta. Next up, the Ishizu cards. Graveyard Control is very good. Pitching them off of the furniture to, get them in rotation. They are limited, so, you don't really get much of a choice, but only, so you have to play 1. But they're very much worthy of consideration if you want more graveyard control for your furniture pitches. And last but not least, Absolute King Backjack. Just getting, more traps in rotation, especially turn 0, is always welcome. I think Backjack is, worth consideration as a one-of, like Bigfoot. but I don't think like in general he's very good, especially in Fern Lab, due to just the nature of Fern Lab and its desire for consistency. And Backjack kind of removes that consistency, as well as the lack of normal traps that you're going to be playing. So we need to talk about the side deck, specifically what you can play in it, what your options are, what you can go for. First up, we're gonna talk about Ulti Slayer. I love Ulti Slayer. Having your opponent just like be unable to respond to things, and then like it's not a once per turn, so the ability to just bin something like an Entis, a Malong, a Miralogic, just like pop your opponent's board, clear 2 things, it's just so good. The fact that it shuffles as well is really good. There's other targets you can go for, like Cambo Raster to protect your back row. You can play Trouble Sunny, although Trouble Sunny does require a Garnet, which you have to side into, so keep that in mind. But ultimately, I think Ulti Slayer is probably your best and most consistent option, just because of how much space you're going to have. Again, this is one for your Prosperity, if you're on Prosperity, because you don't want to be extra banishing everything. But Ulti Slayer is just a weird tech that I don't think people respect enough. And I think you should strongly consider it, especially if, the meta is very diverse and, there's lots of different things that you want to be hitting. Next up, we've got Super Poly. Super Poly, I think, is a very niche card. In Furniture Lab, you're always going to be discarding already, so you're going to be like dropping your hand size down a lot. You also have to be on like the Prosperity build, which means that like you need to be finding Super Poly as well as, keeping your targets for Super Poly. So I think Super Poly is a very weak option, but it's definitely something to consider if it's very strong in the current meta. You should be aware that this is a very, very, very powerful blowout against you specifically, since it can be chained to your normal traps to deny Lady and just, blow out your board. I hate Super Poly, but it is a good card, but it's worth consideration. Lord of the Heavenly Prison. He's in here because I have no real reasons to put him in here, but, we got to talk about him because you're going to be hear some things and people are going to be like, you should play Lord of the Heavenly Prison, and I'm going to tell you right now, he's not it. Protecting your back row is not something that Furniture Lab specifically really needs. Your floodgates are all going to be lingering, so the things that you really have to be aware of are things like Twin Twister, Cosmic, that are going to be able to chain before you can activate Coup Clock to resolve a trap that you set this turn. Yes, it protects your skill drain and stuff, but like if it's face up, Lord doesn't protect it. He's just kind of a big guy. The things he sets aren't particularly great. He's much better in the trap heavy belt. So I really don't like Lord, but he's an option for you. That's for sure. Next up, we got to talk about the Solemns. Every back row deck, we got to talk about Solemns. Judgment, Warning, and Strike are the only ones worth contemplating. Judgment is definitely should be in your side. It's Judgment. It's Old Men Say No. Yes, it doesn't hit Ash, but it's Solemn Judgment. It beats, things like Evenly, which are actual blowouts. Solemn Strike lets you beat Ash. It's okay. He's not Gamma. He thinks he's Gamma, but he's not Gamma. But it's worth considering in like formats where like you need Strike. It sucks, but it's worth contemplating sometimes. If you feel like you really desperately need, the hate for Ash, just, think about Strike. And Solemn Warning. Warning is by far the weakest. It doesn't have any like extra bonus things. It's just Warning. It shouldn't be in here, but it's a solemn card. If I don't put it in here, people are going to yell at me. So don't really think about Warning. But the other two are definitely worthy of consideration. And last but not least, the Kaiju type monsters. Kaijus are pretty much always a plus, especially when you can play Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. You can pitch it off furniture to get like your search of a Kaiju early. They're Kaijus. Keep in mind that Lava Golem and Sphere Mode take up your normal, so you can't like normal Ariana, which really sucks, but they remove more. So when you want to hit individual things, Gamma Seal, whatever Kaiju you have is the way to go. It doesn't really matter which one. Keep in mind that Welcome will lock you, so Interrupted Kaiju Slumber cannot be played like under Welcome because you're going to summon more than just, Radiant. But every other Kaiju can be summoned, from hand because Welcome only locks you from deck and extra deck. But Lava Golem and Sphere Mode are only if you're truly desperate. Now, we need to talk about counters. So first up, you have to be aware of Ash and Bell, as they are going to be your biggest, pains in the butt, since they are going to chain block Lady from setting off of Big Welcome and Welcome, because, one, they're going to chain block, and two, they're going to prevent you from summoning your monsters. These are just like the general weaknesses of the deck. You don't hard lose to them like something like, say, Branded, but they do really hurt. Your best option is most people are going to be playing Ash, but Bell will be in the side. So do your best to play around Ash simply by getting to both welcomes at the same time. They can only Ash one, so resolving preferably big is always better, but you know, you do what you can. Sometimes they're just going to have it, and you got to say they got to have it. So do your best to play around them. Again, it's not always in your control. Royal Decree, it's going to hurt. Royal Decree is very annoying sometimes. It can hurt a lot, especially when it's backed up by a lot of other, you know, engine pieces. It can just shut you down. But you know, there are counters to it. The same way you're going to have to be able to beat Denko Sekka and any of the Dark Simorgh Jinzo cards. The combo to beat them is very simple. Presuming they have no interruptions, you can normal Ariana. You can then grab Lady. You can special Lady. You can link them away for either Muck or Nightmare Phoenix. And then if you have to beat Denko, you just revive Lady, walk over Denko, or Dark Simorgh or Jinzo, whatever it is. And if you need to go for Phoenix, you pop Decree. It's a little weird, but you know, that's how it's got to be sometimes. That's how you beat those dumb floodgates. You know, our job is to floodgate. We don't want to get floodgated, so that's how you beat the silly floodgates. The Bestials, these guys are the worst. I hate the Bestials. Oh my god. Getting your furniture Bestialed really sucks. They just turn into advantage for your opponent. They're just so frustrating. They're gonna Bestial your clock, they're gonna Bestial your stove, your Chandra, and it's gonna feel terrible, but you know, the best way you can play around that is to go for a big welcome, to dodge it, to bring them back. Sometimes they're just going to have Magnamut, and that'll be that. But be aware that the Bestials do a lot of damage. And, of course, Epidemic Eradicator. Epidemic Eradicator is, of course, you know, a counter. It can call traps, although 95% of the time it is used to call spells. But it can call traps, and it does counter you. Note that, you know, any piece of engine does beat Eradicator. If you have Ariana, you can beat Eradicator. If you have furniture, you beat Eradicator. This card sometimes auto wins, sometimes it doesn't. It's very strange in this matchup specifically, but keep in mind that it does in fact counter you. Next up, we got to talk about the sweepers. And there's two categories of sweepers. There's the category of sweepers that really hurt, which is Evenly and Cosmic, and to a lesser extent Twin Twisters, and the sweepers that everyone thinks are really good, but don't hurt as much as you might think. So we're going to be talking about, first up, Harpies and Storm, and the reason why they don't hurt as much as you think. Lightning Storm and Harpies are what people think beats Furniture Lab. It's not what beats Furniture Lab. You can set things up in Grave to get recursion. You can get your traps back and stuff. Harpies and Lightning Storm do not end the game on themselves. They are frustrating. They are not, you know, just the end of the game a lot of the time. They can be sometimes, so be aware that, you know, they're still not bad options, but they aren't just, you know, press button, win game. They can be frustrating, but they aren't typically the end of the game unless you're on a lot of, you know, normal traps. The cards that really hurt are Twin, Cosmic, and Evenly. Twin hurts the least because it destroys, so you can put stuff in Grave, you can chain it, you know, you can get stuff back. It hurts, but it's a quick play, so it can be used to beat like your set off of Lady, which is frustrating, but you know, not the end of the world. It's just, it is a quick play, so it does hurt a lot. Cosmic is very frustrating because if they snipe a big welcome, you lose out on a lot of recursion. If they snipe a welcome, you lose out on a lot of recursion. It's just a card that like is able to snipe your EEB. It's able to snipe your dim barrier, your set off Lady, etc. It's just Cosmic like interacts and like prevents you from recurring resources. And the worst thing is Evenly, just because of the way that Evenly like prevents you from like recouping resources, is so fundamentally frustrating. That's the only reason that EEV is like really good. It's not because it is particularly good. It's just that it prevents the recuperation of resources. You can play around it by waiting for them to go battle and Eradicator calling trap, but that's not a consistent out. So keep in mind that these cards are, you know, kind of going to be the bane of your existence. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something as well. I apologize that it took me so long to do, but I'm very thankful for everyone's patience with it. The support you guys have given me over the last like month means the world to me. So we're gonna get back on that YouTube grind. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.